NPK, the NPK Show. NPK to all the viewers around the world. You're watching the NPK Show.
So, it's podcast 147. We're 3 weeks away from our podcast 150, which is the big one. And we have got a special guest all the way from Wisconsin. Colman, pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me today.
Colman is from the owner of Quest Dehumidification.
Oh, I'm not the owner.
No?
I'm a sales rep from, I primarily handle the Northeast, the New England area in the U.S., and then far Southeast, like Florida and down to Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Well, whoever the owner of Quest Dehumidification is, that was a big compliment because his passion when we've just been talking. I'll call that the green room, the chill area. It's really just where we sit when we don't podcast. But yeah, I've just been chatting away there for probably well over an hour, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a good conversation.
I thought you were the owner. You were that passionate about the products, and your knowledge is phenomenal.
Thank you.
The owner should be very happy with you as a rep. So a big shout out to you. So today's podcast is education for myself as well, because I've personally never used dehumidification in my room. It's always been managing my air and extraction to remove humidity and increasing temperatures, doing stuff like that to manage the humidity levels. But there's equipment that you use and it gets rid of the excess moisture in the air. And there's big reasons for that. So essentially, we're talking about Quest as a company and their dehumidification products, but it's a podcast on environment and more specifically humidity control. And I'm going to get Colman to talk a little bit about VPD as well. You've heard us mention it a few times in the past. It's the next level of humidity knowledge, isn't it? It's if you don't measure humidity, then you need to. There's still some people don't use thermometer hygrometers, so you need to buy a thermometer hygrometer. You measure humidity, and then the advanced growers that have been doing that for years, it's time to start looking at VPD and vapor pressure deficit. And we've got a big hand up outside. If mentioned Dutch Garden, do not call us DGS. And okay.
We'll give him the proper name. Dutch Gardenings.
So you don't want to be called DGS because Nutriculture DGS, you're going to get confused with them, and these are what you're saying to me. You're a much better company than DGS, and Dutch Garden Supplies was around first. And fuck DGS, you plastic manufacturing motherfuckers. Mic drop, boom. I would actually love to keep that whole bit of conversation in the podcast, but Coates, cut that out. Does he want it in? It's up to Andy if he wants it in, because that was not true. Andy's a very respectable guy, but Andy from Dutch Garden Supplies is the wholesaler for Quest, and April 19th is the date that he's been telling everyone that they're available. So listen, if you're a grow shop in the UK and you have customers for dehumidifiers, then you'll understand by the end of the podcast. But in the hour that I've just spent with Colman, then these are really good. And the reason that they're really good, we'll talk about this in more detail, is the standard by which they're tested on. We'll get to that towards the end of the podcast. But Quest, it's a US company. It's dehumidification. Why should people bother with a dehumidifier? They've got on just fine without one so far.
Well, and I might even question, have they gotten along just fine? Yeah. Primarily, you briefly mentioned we are more prominent in sealed gardens.
Yeah.
The whole question of have they gotten along okay up until this point is really understanding the value of using dehumidification to avoid mold-related issues.
Yeah.
So whether that's powdery mildew or botrytis, by controlling your relative humidity, we can avoid those problems from even being present. So if you're running into that condition, a dehumidifier is really your permanent solution.
Mm. These molds, powdery mildew, botrytis is the big baddie. Powdery mildew, easy to get rid of. It's still a pain. but not the end of the world if it's on your plant. Usually appears in veg. It's like it makes your plants look great, like a grey mold that appears on the leaf. And there's some natural ways to get rid of it. But if those don't work, people tend to spray pesticides. And the big thing in the US, where there's a big legal medicinal cannabis market, is that, and we were talking about this early on, weren't we? If some places have got farms or areas where they're producing up to £500,000 worth of medicinal cannabis, 10% of that is often has to be binned because it's got powdery mildew or mold spores. It
ends up being, in the states, those rules change state by state, and so from a regulation standpoint, different states have different standards as far as how clean that medicinal product is required to be.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're growing medicine, why would you ever allow any kind of mold to exist on medicine?
Yeah.
I agree. Powdery mildew is a problem that can be overcome with fungicides and washes and such.
But that's curing. Whereas we're about to talk about prevention now, aren't we?
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So at the same time, even though you've killed that mold, that mold spore is still on that product. You've now also added another chemical, whether it be natural or not, to kill that, and that is now on a product that somebody's going to end up consuming.
And powdery mildew and botrytis, correct me if I'm wrong, but those spores are around us pretty much constantly, and all they're waiting for is the right environment to be able to breed, replicate, and take hold of a plant. So if you've not been controlling your humidity properly, and you've been getting lucky, it's the same quote, I've never used dehumidification before, and I've been getting along just fine. The first thing that springs to my mind is when I used to drive a Ford Focus 1.25 Gaia back in 1998. And for me, as a new driver, that was just fine. I was getting along great in that. I was made up. Little did I know that there was the Audis, the BMWs, the Mercedes out there with the leather seats and the air conditioning and the heated seats for in the winter. Oh, now I'm getting along just fine. And maybe in another 10 years, I might be looking at Lamborghinis and these might be really just fine. So it's all about perspective, isn't it? People think that they're getting along just fine because they don't know any better. Whereas when they start implementing these changes, dehumidification, proper air and extraction, proper nutrients, just the whole range, they go, oh, how was I doing it for so wrongly for so long?
Absolutely. I mean, you stand to improve your quality.
Yeah.
You stand to improve your yield. People don't potentially realize that, if you have PM in your plants while they're growing, that plant is trying to overcome that fungus, and that plant is not growing as healthy and as robust as it could.
It's literally that powdery mildew has tiny protrusions that will get into the leaf and is literally sucking the nutrients and the liquids out of the plant. So everything that you're trying to do to it, powdery mildew is living off it. So essentially you're growing half a plant and half a powdery mildew. So you're going to get half the yields, aren't you, at the end of the day? The big baddie, though, and the one where dehumidification truly comes into its own, is botrytis. It's the killer of crops. Once you've got it, I believe it's, unless you can start doing ultraviolet radiation and using those UV lamps to try and control it, once it's in the room, it's pretty much game over. It's a mission to control rather than cure once it's in there.
And I would venture to say that, a UV light is going to have a whole lot of problem trying to penetrate to the center of a flower like that.
Which is where it all starts, isn't it?
Exactly. You really do need a low enough relative humidity to allow that moisture to basically wick to the outside of the flower and then be uptaken into the ambient airstream.
Yeah. So we're going to go on about it. We've mentioned this multiple times, but for a good few weeks now, we've been political. We've been talking a lot about the areas around growing. Let's get right back into environment and give some top tips. So from when a plant is at its seedling stage all the way through to harvest, drying, what are your recommended humidity points and temperatures through the stages of growing? And also what we talked about there, allowing you said that at 26 degrees Celsius and a 55% humidity, it's not set. You're allowed a little bit of a buffer, aren't you? So you can move a little bit beyond those ranges, which the dehumidifier allows. But from start to finish, what would be roughly your humidity and temperature parameters?
So you're absolutely right. There's, I wouldn't call them hard and fast rules. It's important to understand that different life phases of the plant appreciate different relative humidities. It's important to understand that the plant can thrive at higher humidities, but you might be making yourself susceptible to some of those mold problems.
Yeah.
So, as you look at, these relative humidities are pretty much, I feel like, common knowledge. When you're in your cloning, your propagation stages, we don't want to stress the plant out, so we're giving it a very high humidity environment. When you're 65 to 75% relative humidity. As we move into our veg phase, we're trying to keep it in that 60, 65% relative humidity. And as I flip to flower, it's really relevant to keep a less than 55% relative humidity, because that's what mold requires to be able to grow, is 55% relative humidity. When we look at mold needs the correct relative humidity. It needs a warm enough environment, which we always have in a garden, and it needs that food source. So if we can remove one of those, oftentimes I refer to them as a leg on a stool. Let's make the stool fall over. So if we keep that relative humidity below 55%, mold can't grow then.
And when we have a higher humidity in veg, it's because, especially with the clones, just to give a little bit of quick science, the root structure isn't fully formed. So we require a high humidity because we slow down the transpiration rate within a plant, so that the moisture, the water and the nutrients that it can uptake, they're not losing too quickly. And the reason that we're not too bothered about molds in the veg period, because the humidity is above 55%, the plant is just vegetative, it's leafy. We can get good air movement around thin surface areas, so it's quite hard for a mold to take hold and develop. Whereas when you come to the flowering stages, on a lot of fruit and plants, there's a big bud, there's big fruit, and it's dense fruit as well. So there's it's harder than in a high humidity environment to get rid of that. And mold spores then can take hold, develop, procreate, and then hopefully not, but engulf whole flowers and spread ridiculously. So if you've been lucky and you haven't bothered with maintaining a control on your humidity, or so your temperatures as well, because they're both linked. It's relative humidity to the temperature. I hope we've harped on enough throughout our podcasts to make you realise the importance of it, because you may have had 5 goes at growing and you've had no issues at all, and then that one time that you really need to do well, and you're going to have major problems.
And it really is that move to begin to think more preventative in nature, rather than constantly running around with your head cut off trying to put out fires.
Exactly.
Rather than treating my plants to get rid of a complete outbreak of PM, I'm taking more of a stepped or measured approach. So as I move from clone to veg, I'm perhaps doing a light pre-treatment of a fungicide to make sure that I'm not perpetuating something that's already existing. And when I move from veg to flower, I'm giving it another light treatment so that from there on, it's dehumidification that's taking care of it for me.
Okay, let's get into the dehumidifiers, and this is where Colman has been educating me and is going to talk about the dehumidifiers. Quest has got, for the UK, we've got 5 options, and read them off super quickly. 4 options. Oh, yeah. So the Quest 70 overhead dehumidifier, which does 26 litres a day. The Quest 155 overhead does 75 litres a day. The Quest CDG we're moving on to portable dehumidifiers now, just 36 litres a day. And the Quest CDG 114 does 55 litres a day. And then the fifth product that I've just seen there is an airflow. It's a good product to move the air around the room. Now,
I always refer to that as an under canopy air mover.
Yeah.
We're really focusing on the fact that as your canopy develops in the room, you've got nice oscillating airflow, usually above the canopy, and we get pockets of really high humidity, stagnant air underneath the canopy. The differentiation in some of our models are, as many years ago, as we came into the gardening market, we saw a lot of these portable dehumidifiers being used because they had very high capacities. They were traditionally like a flood restoration type of dehumidifiers. When a pipe breaks in your house, the insurance company pays for a company to come dry out your house and try and restore it to original. We've kind of shifted. We do manufacture those products, but also shifted some of those ideals to say, hey, we have some more energy efficient options in an overhead dehumidifier where we can put that dehumidifier and hang it from the ceiling. We can get better energy efficiency. We get a better cost on the performance because you're not paying for wheels and a handle and a condensate pump, the rugged durability to go up and down stairs and such.
Yeah.
So it's been a better fit for the gardening market. Both of them are really good options if you need that ability to move things around. And we get a lot of people that do, move those dehumidifiers in late in flower, and then they'll pull them out and they'll use them in their drying room and then move them back into the flowering.
Yeah, in separate rooms. So those models, the portable ones, are called the CDG. What does that stand for?
And that reflects CDG is our way of saying curing, drying, and greenhouse.
Yeah.
Characteristically, where we see that some of that need for more portability.
Yeah.
In the U.S., the lion's share, the majority of the large cultivators are all using an overhead styled dehumidifier.
Yeah, because I said straight away, didn't I, when I was looking at the sheet, that the overhead ones probably wouldn't sell as well in the UK. It'd be more the portable ones. But then the RRPs are pretty similar across both ranges because, like you said, you're paying for the handle and the wheels and the durability. And also the great point is that the overhead doesn't take up any floor space, which is really precious in a lot of people's grow room. Some people can just about get in there, fit the water butts, and they want to get more plants in there. So floor space is really precious. So you've got to think, do you need it to be portable or is it just going to be stationary? In which case you're going to go for the overhead ones.
And that's one of the value features of our product is all of them are ductable. So the dehumidifier doesn't even have to be in the conditioned space. The dehumidifier can be out and we can duct the supply air into the room and a return air supply back to the dehumidifier.
Yeah.
One of the things I always caution people with ducting, it doesn't mean that you can duct. A dehumidifier does generate some warm air, so it has a little bit of a heat load on the room. You can't duct that hot air out of the room. If you've done that, you've just bought yourself a really expensive ventilation fan.
There's a really important point there. If you're going to listen to any part of the podcast, this is probably, for the industry, one of the most important points. If you're a grower, the most important point is control your humidity, control your environment. But for the industry and for shops that are listening, this is a super important point and what the take-home message is going to be. Quest dehumidifiers test and run their appliances according to the highest level of testing procedure. And you may want to mention some manufacturers, but high level, big corporate dehumidifiers all run to a AHAM.
So yes, this all comes down to how a dehumidifier manufacturer states their performance.
Yeah.
Being a U.S. manufacturer, we use a testing standard called AHAM. It's the American Home Appliance Manufacturers, and what it really did was let all the manufacturers state their performance at a standard condition, which happens to be 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 60% relative humidity. That would be about 26.6 Celsius and 60% relative humidity. So that when a consumer would walk into a store to look for a dehumidifier for their basement, they would be able to do an apples to apples comparison. What we find with a lot of the European, Asian dehumidifier manufacturers is they've chosen higher temperatures and higher relative humidities to state their performance. So that does a couple of things. One, it kind of blows up their performance number. So when you think you're buying let's use a 26 liter dehumidifier, for example, when you're actually using it in a gardening space, which is closer to that 26.6 and 60%, it has like half the performance.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things that very quickly popped up in the U.S. market as we're competing with some of those other manufacturers. Is customers come to us and they're like, "Oh, your dehumidifier really actually works."
Yeah,
and it's just because of a rating game that's kind of being played, or the fact that they're rating their equipment at a condition that isn't really relevant to a gardener.
Yeah. To put it into sorts of super simple terms, if you had two rooms, and basically the method that the cheap dehumidifiers are using to make their equipment look top range is essentially testing a room that is fuller, a lack of science here, is full of water molecules. The room has higher quantity of water molecules at a higher temperature, so the room can hold more as well, and it just has more water molecules. So the machine is able to capture these water molecules easier, and it can say our dehumidifier captures 100 water molecules per second. Woohoo! But then when they put that same dehumidifier into a room that has less water molecules and a lower temperature, so the room can hold less water, then the machine struggles, because it was great at capturing it when it was in abundance. Now it's not so good when it's got to work a little bit harder now to capture these water molecules. So it's the take-home message is that the Quest dehumidifiers adhere to the AHAM standards, and that is tested at 60% humidity with roughly 26 degrees Celsius, where other dehumidifiers are tested in much easier environments. So like you say, great word, fluffs up the numbers. So you've got to be really careful. You might be able to save, let's say, £500, £1,000 buying this cheap stuff. And I've heard plenty of stories from Colman and about these growers that have bought the cheaper units. We can remove 55 litres an hour. 24 hours later, there's barely 10 litres in the tank, because it's a grow room. It's not just a humid room.
And where that really becomes relevant is when you're trying to correctly size a dehumidifier for a garden. You need to pick a unit that's sized correctly for the conditions that you're going to have. Sizing a dehumidifier is really about water load. It's not so much about your square footage or square meters or cubic meters. It's not so much about the watts that you're running in that room. It's all about, we're trying to remove water, so it's all about water load on that room, and that really comes back to the amount that we're feeding our plants on a daily basis. Yeah. So to bring this full circle, if I'm watering 50 liters per day, I need a dehumidifier that can remove 55 or 50 or more liters of water per day. If I've just bought a dehumidifier that was rated at a higher condition and it says it can remove 50 liters, but it's at a much higher temperature and higher relative humidity, when I actually put it in my garden, well, actually, maybe I needed two of those. Yeah. And
you're saying to me that the grower in the US that did what we've just been talking about, he actually said his humidity was sitting at 67, 68 in flower. He needed it to get right down because he doesn't want the mold issues. And he said within 24 hours, it took it down by about 3%. It just wasn't moving what it needed to move. So for shops, for big industry growers, be careful. Make sure it's adhering to AHAM standards. And Quest is basically been built for the grow room. So it's the one to get, and it's in multiple grow rooms around the US as well. It's tried, it's tested by multiple commercial growers in the US. You showed me some great pictures as well. Incidentally, do you have, does Quest have an Instagram?
They do.
Yeah.
It's a Quest_Hydro.
Okay. Pictures on there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're interested about the types of facilities that Quest is in, go to Quest_Hydro. You'll be able to see Quest being used in big commercial facilities. So if it's good enough for them, it's probably good enough for you. Now, UK and US, there's a big difference, because US, you were saying, is roughly, in your experience, 80% plus for closed room systems.
Definitely the majority.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas the majority in the UK would just be open room systems. So has the UK, the US definitely, closed room systems definitely need good dehumidification. The UK, can our UK growers with open rooms benefit from the dehumidifiers as well?
Absolutely. And I think some of that comes down to what type of ventilation or you guys call it extraction scheme that you want to run, rather than just having that ventilation fan on all the time. Your best circumstance would be to run it during lights on, and as we go to lights off, that timer on my ventilation fan should shut off, and I'm going to dehumidify and dry out that room as much as possible. Characteristically during the day when our heat is up, it's making our relative humidity low, and as the lights go off, our temperature drops. The size of our container drops with a lower temperature, so our relative humidity spikes as a percentage of the available temperature. So really, a dehumidifier shines during its lights off.
Yeah, in the UK, everywhere in the world, one of the most important pieces of kit is a filter. And what filters are notoriously good at is holding on to water. So you go to your grow shop, I'm speaking to the growers now, and you buy yourself, hopefully, a good branded carbon filter. If the humidity is too high, which anything above, let's say, 55%, 60% is technically too high for a filter, it's going to start holding onto the water molecules. And when a filter holds onto water molecules, it hasn't got space to hold on to adsorb smelly molecules. So you buy your filter in the knowledge that this filter, if looked after, can last you 6 to 9 months. The really good ones, like the CANNA originals, can last up to 24 months because they're packed so tightly. But your room is running a high humidity, and that filter is going to be very quickly filled with water molecules. Now your filter that lasts a year, maybe only going to last you 6 months, and your air extraction, the fan that you bought to pull the air out and cope with the heat load in the room, is now going to struggle to pull the air through the filter because it's clogged up. Your heat's going to go up, relative humidity will drop even more, and smelly molecules, organic compounds, can't make it through the filter. So it's that, in my opinion, for the UK and around the world, is going to be a big reason to start looking at dehumidification models. Just literally, it's going to cost you money to buy one, but it's going to save you money in so many different ways. My way, it's going to extend the life of your carbon filter. So rather than spending £200 every 6 months, you're spending £200 once a year because your filter's going to last you. You're saying in the US, with these stringent testing practices, that a dehumidifier, which prevents powdery mildew and can help prevent botrytis and other molds, that's literally can take up 15% of a US commercial grower's crop. You're saying 50% is just, sometimes 50% is just
it can take 100%.
Exactly.
Again, and that goes back to state by state regulations or testing requirements.
Yeah.
And again, we're growing medicine, so having mold present on medicine, you just can't have it.
Yeah.
It all comes back to the quality, the integrity of the grower, of the quality of the product that they're growing. You had some really good comments about the carbon filters, and yes, if it's busy absorbing moisture, it's not doing what you really bought it for, which is to scrub odor. And if it's not scrubbing the odor, well, you're likely to piss off your neighbors.
Yeah, definitely. So the US versus the UK, what I like to ask our friends across the pond is a little bit off the subject here, but how do you see, what do you differences? How long have you been in the UK? Have you been in the UK before?
This is my first time.
First time?
It's day 3.
Day 3. Okay, so first of all, where have you visited so far? Whereabouts in the UK?
Oh, you're going to make things difficult.
Okay, you come to,
a little bit in London, a little bit in London, Midlands.
Okay, so you travelled
now
from
here
London
to Liverpool.
up to Liverpool, and he decides to spend his birthday in Liverpool, the capital of birthday nights out.
Yeah,
you can have a good night.
I'm looking forward to it,
especially with Andy. I don't know what or where he's going to take you.
Cavern Club.
Cavern Club, the home of the Beatles.
Yes.
Yeah. You'll have
I'm
a good,
excited.
what day is it? Thursday? Yeah, you'll have some good bands on in the Cavern Club. But the UK versus the US, in the 3 days that you've been here, what sort of differences can you see? What's your experiences of the UK, and how does it differ from the US?
So,
And you can be nasty as well. You can say you're well behind.
That's my pre-statement here is without being a negative. I see like it was in the U.S. Maybe 10 years ago, where there's perhaps an education level, perhaps a lot of focus on how do I do this as cheap as possible, and then they wonder why quality and yield isn't where it could be. There's a lot of things to be learned by the trial and error and expansion pains that many of the states in the U.S. have gone through. You get to see things being done successfully on a large scale that very much you can go and say, oh, well, I can buy that light. Oh, I can buy that dehumidifier. I can buy that air conditioner. I can buy that fertigation system. You can see what nutrient lines very successful commercial growers that are really growing quality product have available.
Do you know, one of the I'll say the downsides of this podcast is we do this to help educate and to get great guests on like yourself that can talk about good products as opposed to the shit products that people can buy. And the thing that sort of annoys me is that everybody listening to this podcast right now is we're not talking about you, because you're taking the time to download the podcast and try and learn a little bit more. You might know all this already and you're just listening for entertainment or just to try and find little bits to improve your knowledge. But everyone that's listening, I know you're of that mindset that you know that there's a lot more to learn. And if I could, this might sound harsh, but I'd love to swap you all for the people that don't believe that they can be educated. I'd love just for 1 week to be able to get the podcast to the people that think that they know it all. They buy cheap. They don't believe that the thermometer hygrometer is an essential tool in the room. They buy the cheap filter because it only does this. They spend £500 on nutrients, but only spend £50 on the lights.
Yeah, you do get what you pay for. Absolutely. So, and that's a lesson that's learned over and over and over again. You do get what you pay for.
Yeah. So just the reason I asked the question UK versus US as well is because we are still stuck in that rut. Again, not for the people listening, because you obviously want to listen and learn as much as possible. But a lot of us are stuck in that rut where we think we know it all. And I just want to say that I just wanted for you to clarify, the US was there 10 years ago and it took education. For you now, where are those growers from 10 years ago that thought that they knew it all, bought cheap? What are they doing now?
Well, even today, and I think the lesson here is to be humble.
Yeah.
Even a lot of the best master growers, directors of cultivation, all have an opportunity to learn something. In this field, if you feel like you know it all and you've stopped learning, you're kidding yourself.
You've only been doing it for a year.
There's no end to whether it's product strains or different soil mediums and growing styles and light systems, different environmental controls that can all be utilized to improve your game. Yeah. And that's really the lesson. Be humble.
It's definitely it's a great shout. If you really did know it all, wouldn't that be really boring? If you actually knew everything, I just think personally for me, that would be really boring. The fact that I know nothing about this industry keeps me going with it on the podcast, because I learn stuff every day, just researching the podcast, meeting people like yourself that can educate me. And that's the beauty of not just this industry, but a lot of industries, that there's so much to learn. Even in the next 20 years, I'm never going to be bored. I'm always going to be passionate, because in 20 years, I do this shit every single day. I'll take like a bit of family time Sunday, but I do this shit every day and I'm constantly learning.
Yeah, we've all had that job that you get and it's new and it's exciting and you're learning. And then, 5 years later, it's, punching the clock.
Yeah.
You know, just
I don't think I'll ever
going
get.
to work every day. And,
I don't
and
think
that's
I'll ever get
definitely
this.
this industry has provided no end to new experience, new opportunities to learn.
Yeah. And again, I'm not speaking to the people that listen because you're on our wavelength, but I just wish you could grab a few hundred of the people I think that they know it all and put you in a room with a few people and just go, now talk. Now tell them that.
You know, the one thing I do see here is the folks running these hydroponic stores are here to help you, and they will provide you great advice if you will take the time to listen. As owners of hydroponic stores, I'm sure you have 100 stories where you provided somebody great advice and they turned around and they did exactly the opposite of what you told them. You know,
You see, and again, I'm super biased for our industry, the hydro industry, but the majority of grow shop owners, and again, this applies to the US, they can't afford to give bad advice because you will very soon find out if the advice that grow shop was giving you was good or bad. If it's bad advice, then you'll do poorly and you won't go to that grow shop again. So it's not in a grow shop owner's interest to give bad advice. So the majority of them do try the best to give good advice. But essentially, even I've wanted to say this for a few podcasts as well. Just because we do the podcast and you listen week in, week out, thank you very much. Don't just take what we say as gospel. Use what we say, learn from it, but then go and do your own research. Don't trust what we say because we're not God. We don't know everything. We just know as much as we know because we're passionate about it. So use what we say as a trigger to think, wow, you know what? After today's podcast, I'm really interested in the dehumidifier systems. I'm really interested about VPD, which we haven't really spoke about too much. I'm going to go and do my own research and then you come back to the podcast and that's how learning occurs. But I'm going to do it for the last 5 minutes. VPD. It's the next level of humidity control. About humidity. In a nutshell, tell them about VPD so that they can go and do more research on it.
Sure. VPD stands for vapor pressure deficit. What that refers to is the vapor pressure that is the difference between the ambient air and how it pushes upon the stomata within the leaf of the plant. The stomata reacts to how much moisture is in the air.
Yeah.
How much moisture is in the air also affects the water's ability to be released from the stomata and enter the ambient airstream. So to take that a step back further, the stomata is the opening at the leaf level. That's it's kind of a two-way street. So when it's opened optimally, it has the ability to uptake CO2 and be able to release oxygen and water. If things are too humid in the room, the stomata is trying to release water, and because the humidity is too high, it doesn't have the ability to absorb that water into the airstream. If the water can't leave the stomata, the capillary action through my stem, my trunk, down to the roots stops. So I'm not effectively pulling nutrients through the plant because the humidity is too high. At the same time, because that two-way street is loaded up with water trying to leave, it also can't uptake CO2 as effectively.
Yeah.
On the completely opposite end, if it's too dry in that room, your stomata are naturally going to want to close because they want to protect the plant from transpiring too much moisture. That effectively does the same thing. As it closes up, it's not able to uptake CO2. It's not able to release moisture and water vapor, thus affecting the capillary action from the root zone and failing to pull nutrients through the plant. So the whole concept with VPD is let's give the plant the ideal temperature and humidity combination. And that isn't one condition. We kind of briefly talked about different life stages of the plant from cloning, propagation through veg through flowering, being a slow drop in that relative humidity to make the plant excel at growing. So we're trying to fit within a window of temperature. Oftentimes, I identify that temperature myself based upon what somebody can afford to maintain from a heating and cooling standpoint, and then what we can do to line that up with a combination of relative humidities that will match those temperatures. We really got to look at daytime temperature and nighttime temperature, and fall within that chart.
Yeah.
When you look at a VPD chart, I'm quick to say, those too wet and too dry conditions are on that VPD chart. The VPD chart characteristically doesn't hone in on that bank or that window of temperature and humidity. So there's some things that you need to do yourself, or I shared with you, my markup of a VPD chart, which is pretty rudimentary, but it really focuses you on that window where you want to be, and kind of, how that segments out depending upon the life cycle of the plant. Yeah.
And I wanted to mention VPD because for those that think they've got it cracked with the humidity, they know 70% roughly in veg down to 45, 50% in flower. That's right, but it's also a lot more complex than that as well. At the same time, if you truly want to get the most out of your plants, it starts to have a look at VPD, start looking at the definitions of it and how you can control and steer the plant through manipulating the VPD. You could have, for example, super quick, you could be running the EC of your feed at 1.5 and have a certain humidity and temperature, and the plant runs fine. As soon as that temperature goes up a little bit and the humidity drops, the plant starts drinking more. All of a sudden, you're still running at 1.5 EC, but you're starting to get leaf burn because the plant's taking up too much nutrients, or it's trying to take up water and it can't because you've still got the 1.5, and you're scratching your head there thinking, how many EC is at 1.5 and I'm getting burn? How is this happening? And it's literally steering the plant wrong. You haven't monitored that the humidity's dropped and the temperatures have gone up, and everything's affected from the tip of the root to the top of the plant. It's all part of one lovely big unit, and every change that you make is going to have consequences within the plant, for better or for worse. So that's why if you think, they're going on about humidity again, boring, then it may be boring. It's not for me, but if you want the best out of your plants, then try and make it not boring, because it's really important. And
one other thing I'd like to point out is, you will, on that chart, you will see an optimal condition at 70% relative humidity, but to understand that once I hit flowering, really, I want to be below 55% so that I'm not potentially susceptible to mold. Yeah. Your plants can and will grow great at 70%, but you are truly rolling the dice whether or not you're going to end up with mold problems, because that's a condition that will support mold.
I love telling stories, and to put that into a quick story, you may be driving your car on a wet motorway at 150 mile an hour, and for 1 mile or 5 miles or 20 miles, you may be in complete control of your car. But eventually, there will come a point where you steer that wheel a little bit too much left, or you hit a little bit of a puddle, you're going to spin out and crash. So that excuse of, I've been doing it for 10 years, I've never had the problem, well, you're just running the statistics game. And eventually, probability, you will get mold. And then by then it's a bit too late. Just prevent rather than cure. Don't drive fast on a wet road. That's the take-home message from today. This podcast could go on for a load more. I'm looking forward to when you come back for part 2, when we can get into the engineering nitty-gritty of what goes on inside the air conditioning units, what goes on inside your dehumidifier unit, and how to effectively run a closed room, because it's something in the UK that not a lot of people are doing. And I think over the next several years, we'll start to see closed rooms increase, and the amount of people using open rooms decrease as they see the benefits of a closed room system.
What really sets Quest apart ends up being we manufacture the most energy efficient dehumidifiers. So especially when you start looking at some of these large cultivations where people are running 10, 20, 30 dehumidifiers throughout a facility, that has some real kilowatt consumption, what that cost is in operating costs. We manufacture the world's most energy efficient dehumidifiers. The close second is our quality and reliability.
Yeah.
One of the differentiators that we have with a lot of the products that are available in the UK market is that we have a 3-year warranty on our equipment.
Nice.
Versus most of the stuff out there is just a 1-year warranty.
Yeah.
Should tell you something about our belief in our reliability.
Exactly. The great thing about warranties is twofold. One, you've got a 3-year warranty, so it doesn't matter if it breaks. 2, the company doesn't want to be if it only lasts 6 months. The company doesn't want to be replaced. Quest doesn't want to be replacing them every 6 months. It must know pretty confidently these dehumidifiers are going to last well over the 3 years. Otherwise, the company be bust. So I like warranties because it says a lot about what you believe about the product as well. So I'm going to get you in for part 2 when you're next in the UK.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come back.
Are you going to make it to the AutoPot Festival in August?
So you caught me on my birthday. Yeah. Unfortunately, you won't get me on my wedding anniversary.
Oh, that's a step too far.
We will actually have a booth at AutoPot.
Yeah.
So other representatives from my company will be there.
Okay.
My coworker that handles the eastern half of the United States with me, I believe Jeff Morey, is going to be there to help everybody out.
Excellent. So shops in the UK, and if you're a real special grower and you've got a special invitation to the event through your shop, you'll be able to find Quest at the AutoPot Festival in August. If you want more information, then go to Andy at Dutch Garden Supplies. He's on. Oh, wow. Usain Bolt. I've never seen anybody run this. Door open, boom, he's in. Move the Capri, son. Have a seat, son.
Thanks very much, brother. No, my email address is actually Andy at dgsupplies.co.uk.
At DG?
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
And the other email is Andy at DJ Supplies, because you're also DG and DJ.
So here's me going on about...
Because you're DJ.
DJs, but it's dgsupplies.co.uk.
Okay.
So get me anytime, 24 hours a day.
Are you coming in to do another song?
I think me and you should sing Colman a little happy birthday song.
And if you have questions for me, my email address is very simply Colman, Coleman, at questhydro.com.
And obliterate his email address with all the questions for me.
Just one other thing, for any shops that we've visited this week, Colman is actually Carlton, because I've introduced him as Carlton to a lot of people just for fun. I haven't told them his real name. So I just thought, so anybody out there, his real name is Colman. And he's fantastic.
I wish the same could be said about you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I appreciate it.
Right, we're going to finish. Listen, before we sing a rendition of Happy Birthday, Colman, thank you very much for making it onto the podcast. Really appreciate it. The knowledge has been fantastic, and we are getting him in for part 2. He's next in the UK. Get into the engineering side of the humidifiers and dehumidifiers and all that sort of stuff.
I can't say how much I've appreciated the invite. It's been a pleasure to meet everybody.
Oh, it's lovely. He's got tears in his eyes.
Right.
This is for you, Carlton.
And this is a real thing for me, because do you know how many subscribers we lost after he did this last thing? Oh, no. So I'm taking a real hit here, but it's all for you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Colman. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
Don't worry, proper gentlemen.
What's your favourite song?
Happy birthday.
What's your favorite?
Oh, you caught me.
What's your favourite song, Nick? What you listen to?
Happy birthday.
What's your actual favourite song? That can't be your favourite song. It's like driving along in the car.
He told me today.
Lately, I've been listening to a West Coast reggae band called The Movement. The song is Habit.
Habit by The Movement. We're going to listen to them right now, and we will be back next week for podcast 149, the prequel to 150. The shit wholesalers and the shit manufacturers, please watch, and we'll get all the phone calls from the day after. We love it.
Brilliant.
Jay from Hydro to Grow, he'll be here. He's no longer going to hold back. Because apparently he was holding back on podcast 100. So God help any people that have pissed him off in the last year. Slim is always just going to be Slim. Tell it as it is.
Slim earlier on.
Yes,
Yeah.
legend. And Aidan from Hydro Pro Washington in Newcastle.
No longer Pro Hydro?
No, he was Pro Hydro Washington.
Yes,
He's now
that's what I was-
Hydro Pro
No,
Washington.
that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, you're one step ahead of me, Andrew.
I like Aidan. Good.
And we are waiting to confirm on some Manchester shops, but we want our Manchester brethren with us. It's going to be a big podcast. It is 1:50 Friday, May the 4th is when we're recording it. It's going to be live. May the 4th be with you. That's why I did it. We've just found out Colman's a massive geek, and we're going to go and talk about Star Wars now. Everyone that's been listening, thank you very much, and we'll be back next Sunday, podcast 149. Thomas is back. See you later. Bye bye.
Like I do.